Hello and welcome to the very first episode of a brand new series I'm doing that's all about famous trees. Around the world and throughout history, certain individual trees have captured our imagination, been a part of significant events, and stood as symbols and monuments. Their stories are countless and fascinating, so join in to learn more about them while I use wood from the same species as each tree to make a little something in its honor. For this first episode, I've grabbed some wood from the Sitka spruce tree because we're going to learn about Kiidk'yaas, the Golden Spruce. In the North Pacific, off the coast of British Columbia, sits the archipelago known as Haida Gwaii. The temperate rainforests of these islands are home to some of the most stunning trees on the planet, a lush green canvas painted with red cedars, hemlocks, alders, and Sitka spruces, by far the largest and most impressive species of spruce trees in the world. And there, along the banks of the Yukon River, once grew a Sitka spruce tree that stood out like a glowing golden beacon among a rich green sea. Kiidk'yaas, which means ancient tree or elder spruce tree in the Haida language of the First Nations people who call these islands home, was a sight to behold. Towering 16 stories tall and 20 feet around, it would have been an impressive spruce in any circumstance. But where all others have those sharp green needles we know and love, Kiidk'yaas's needles were a bright golden yellow. This was the result of a genetic mutation in which the tree lacked 80% of its normal allotment of chlorophyll, something that when observed in other specimens usually resulted in stunted trees or more of a mix of green and golden needles. Kiidk'yaas was wholly unique in being a completely golden towering giant. Standing for over 300 years, the tree is sacred to the Haida people. Their legend tells of a village where, during a time of plenty, the people there were taking too much from the land and upsetting the natural balance of life. As a result, they were punished with a long winter and a terrible storm, with only a young boy and his grandfather surviving. As they fled the village, the grandfather warned the boy to not look back, but the boy couldn't resist, and as he turned to take one last look, the spirits transformed him into a tree in protest at the ways of the people. That tree was Kiidk'yaas, a living connection to the history of the Haida people and a reminder of the importance of a balance in nature. And for those who had the opportunity to see Kiidk'yaas in person, it was easy to see how it became the stuff of legend. On days where the misty haze of the island broke long enough for the tree to stand under the full light of the sun, people spoke of its stunning and strange radiance. The tree wasn't just a unique yellow color, but it seemed to glow, generating its own light from somewhere deep within itself. Now you may of course have noticed that I've been talking about Kiidk'yaas in the past tense, saying it was and it has. And that's because its story sadly takes a tragic turn. Early on the morning of January 20th, 1997, a man named Grant Hadwin swam across the Yukon River with a chainsaw in tow. A former forest engineer, he had spent his early career working in the logging industry helping to survey forests. He quickly became dismayed by the industry's clear-cutting practices and often fell into hot water for advocating to be more selective and sparing old-growth specimens. After a failed attempt at opening his own logging business focused on harvesting beetle kill trees, and more stints with traditional logging companies, his anger only grew, and he began exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, according to his friends and colleagues. Eventually, he set his sights on Kiidk'yaas, as he felt there was hypocrisy in protecting and revering this one tree while countless other old-growth specimens were being felled every day. That fateful morning, he made a series of strategic cuts so the tree would fall during the next windstorm, which is exactly what happened 2 days later. He immediately left the islands for the city of Prince Rupert on the mainland and sent a fax to the media and the Haida Nation claiming responsibility for the act. The reaction was swift, severe, and unified. Members of the Haida Nation, the logging community, conservationists, and the entire surrounding area were all outraged, and the event received extensive media coverage. Hadwin was charged with criminal mischief and the illegal cutting of timber and was ordered to appear in court back on the island. And he decided he'd make the journey across the Hecate Strait back to the island via kayak. Authorities tried to dissuade him from making this treacherous journey in the middle of February, but he wouldn't be convinced, telling everyone he was afraid he'd be attacked by locals if he took a ferry or a plane. A day after being driven back by a storm on his first attempt, he paddled away from Prince Rupert Harbor on the morning of the 13th of February, with 5 days left to make his court date. And that was the last time anyone would report seeing Grant Hadwin again. 4 months later, in June, large fragments of his kayak were discovered on an uninhabited island 70 miles north of Prince Rupert. According to those who found it, the wreckage appeared to be less than a month old, and certain other elements seemed highly suspicious, particularly the location of Hadwin's axe, which was found inland well above the high tide line. This, of course, led to rampant speculation, with some proposing that he had fled to Alaska or perhaps even Siberia. Those closest to Hadwin, though, insist that he was full of indignation and desperate for an opportunity to share his views publicly in front of a judge in the hopes that the public would finally understand his actions. Whether he was lost at sea, escaped into the bush, or captured by angry locals and executed in revenge for his crimes, to this day we don't know his ultimate fate. Sadly, of course, we do know the ultimate fate of Kiidkyaas. After it fell and was grieved, there were attempts to replant offspring of the tree in its stead. Botanists from the University of British Columbia had taken cuttings from Kiidkyaas in 1977, which they'd grafted onto ordinary Sitka spruce samples, resulting in 2 successful golden saplings. After the tree was cut down, the university decided to send one of the saplings to be planted on Haida Gwaii, but it died in storage before it could make the journey. Also, immediately after the tree was felled, the Haida people gave permission to botanists to propagate 80 more cuttings in order to increase the chances of a successful offspring surviving. Not much wood was harvested from the fallen tree, but some that was used to make the top front of Six String Nation, a public art project in which an acoustic guitar was built from a variety of wood and artifacts representing diverse cultures, communities, and events from every province and territory of Canada. Kiidkyaas, the Golden Spruce, a tree that has inspired generations of people with its unique otherworldly beauty, is a really great example of how and why a single tree can mean so much to so many. And its unnecessary and tragic end is, well, it's complicated and part of its story. What Grant Hadwin did was inexcusable and a horrific act against a sacred part of the Haida culture, as are the clear-cutting practices and greed-driven destruction of old-growth forests that Hadwin was protesting against. This was a really fascinating tree to research for this video, and if you want to learn more, I definitely recommend checking out the award-winning 2005 book, The Golden Spruce by John Valiant. For now, though, we're all done here. Our very first famous tree piece carved and assembled from Sitka spruce wood, and I'm pretty happy with how it all came together. Hopefully this episode was as fun for you to watch as it was for me to put together. If it was, please let me know. I'd love to keep this series going. Speaking of which, if there's a famous tree you'd like to see me cover next time, share it with us in the comments, and who knows, maybe it'll be the one I make next.